Good morning, everyone. Basically, I'm going to just give an overview of Common Core and kind of put it in a historical perspective, because a lot of people are thinking that Common Core is just coming out of left field. What is it? And I would like to give you some perspective on it. Common Core are the new national K-12 standards, and pretty much all the states except 46 have adopted it. Now, as you've heard in the news, there's a lot of states that are kind of grumbling and talking about if they're going to stay with it or how they're going to tweak it. And this is kind of the process that it's going through right now. The Common Core standards are actually the brainchild of David Coleman and Jean Wilhoit, and the funding was provided by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they gave a donation of $200 million. And that $200 million wasn't in a lump sum. It was given out to different groups as this process has been going on since about 2009. Oh, I'm sorry. In this video, Bill Gates gives his rationale for his involvement in creating the Common Core. And my daughter's going to push play.
Should be taught what they're going to be tested on, and that we should have great curriculum material. Where 50 states were all different, and many of them weren't teaching kids what you were going to end up being tested on. It was such a cacophony, and it was so low quality compared to other countries, particularly the Asian countries. You know, we had our math textbooks were twice the size of Asian textbooks. So kids are carrying around this heavy thing, and you want to be intimidated by math? Just give the kid a super big textbook. The Asians have these nice thin textbooks, and they really concentrate on teaching the concepts. And what are the results? Well, they spend far, far less money and get far, far better results. So Common Core I would have thought of as more of a technocratic issue, the basic idea of
I cut off here, but he didn't expect it to be a political issue. And he was surprised by the backlash that it received. And I'm just going to highlight some things that Bill Gates talked about. Bill Gates notes the need for a national curriculum that features simplicity. He feels that the curriculum that we had before, first of all 50 states had different curriculum. And I should say not curriculum, but standards, because there is a difference between curriculum and standards. They do interact together, but they are different. And he believes that there needed to be a united set of standards. I mean, you go to anywhere in the world, Spain, United Kingdom, all of these different countries and Asian countries, and they all have a specific set of national standards. We're the only ones that has 50 different standards for 50 different states. He believes in great curriculum material that utilizes technology. He's very, 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 very big on technology. He also believes that a curriculum that allows for American kids to compete internationally. He is being very specific here, specifically competitive with Asian countries, which he sees as being at the top, and us near the bottom. I'm going to give just a very brief overview of the history of American education and its various reform movements. I'm not going to hit on every single one, and the reason I'm going to do this is I want to give a background of where Common Core is coming out of, for those of you who have an idea but may not know where it fits in. The Common Core is nothing new. There have been many attempts in the past to shape the direction of American education. Anybody know who this guy is? Horace Mann. A lot of high schools, a lot of elementary schools, Horace Mann. If you've ever heard Horace Mann Elementary, why are so many different schools named after Horace Mann? Well, he's the father, really, of American education. The greatest contribution that he gave was that he believed that education should be free and available to everybody, to all citizens. The first state to provide free and universal education was Massachusetts. Under the direction of Horace Mann in 1837, he developed the first Board of Education. So before that, there were no Board of Educations anywhere. Mann is considered the father of American education, as I mentioned before, and he believed that education was to equalize the conditions of men. He didn't say women, but men. And in Mann's view, building character was just as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. And he was actually very vocal about that school was a place to civilize people, to bring them to the table, to teach, to uplift. Today, we would consider Mann a reformer for his rhetoric of utilizing education as a as a way to level the playing field and as a place to build character and citizenship skills. Now, education in the deep South and rural America, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is a lot of the critics against Common Core, as you know, are coming from, the southern states or rural America. And there's a reason for it. There's a history here. The southern states, by and large, were the last to offer or require universal education for everyone. There was a great expansion of schools after the Civil War with the Northern occupation. So kind of like it was forced upon them. That doesn't mean they didn't have their little one-room schoolhouses and churches didn't have their schools, but it wasn't something that was consistent until the Northern occupation. In many rural areas throughout the U.S., there was a great emphasis on basics education, which today we would call standards. What are the basics? What do you have to learn? And it goes back, if you can see here, to the McGuffey Readers. Has anybody here heard of the McGuffey Readers? Okay, the McGuffey Readers, believe it or not, have been republished today. And I got on a website, and there's an active group of homeschoolers that are teaching their children with the McGuffey Readers from the 19th century. Kid you not. It's very much, it's very popular today. And it's not just a small fringe group, it's a lot of them. And they're all saying, it teaches to be obedient to God, it teaches morality, and all these other textbooks and curriculums don't teach that. We're going back to McGuffey. The Progressive Era and its impact on American education. The Progressive Era really had the greatest impact of all, time periods on education. It was a far-reaching movement. The Progressive Era schools featured an industrial style of education whereby schools were highly regimented, and they started and ended with bells. So if you've ever been to a school where the bell rang and you were supposed to be in your seat, we all can say that we were part of those kind of schools. I was. Thank the Progressive Era. You went from class to class starting in middle school, the Progressive Era. The idea being that, teachers would teach math or specialists in math, and then you go and English teacher, and then also the vocational training. In the Progressive Era, schools had 2 tracks were instituted, a job skills track that made students ready to work upon high school graduation, and a professional track for students pursuing a career. And that included secretarial things. I mean, that would be considered a career back then. The endless spiral of reform and counter-reform. After the Progressive Era, there was an attempt to swing back to the basics. There we go. Swing back to the basics, which always translates into reading, writing, arithmetic. I don't know how many of you have heard countless times, we need to get back to the basics. We need to get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic. How many of you have heard that rhetoric? Okay. This is actually starting at sometime around the 20s and 30s, and it really gained momentum in the 1950s. Obviously, when Sputnik went up into outer space and the Americans felt the progressive style of education is making our kids fall behind. They're studying all these esoteric things. They're taking wood shop. What's going on? We need to get back to the basics so we can be competitive. And these back to the basics counter movements, reading and math skills are emphasized, while the arts, humanities, and social sciences and studies are de-emphasized. The teaching of the theory of evolution has and continues to be a major point of contention with this group. Okay, and now we have, and I'm almost done with the history, it's not going to go on forever, but the 1960s. And this is extremely important and how it affects us today in the Common Core. The 60s legacy on American education, the 1960s saw, as you know, the greatest change in American education as it related to questions of educational access, equality with respect to gender, race, and social class. And we are still in the throes of those reforms and the impact of it. And most essentially, we are still in the throes of having the counter reaction to the 60s. And really, basically, the conservatives and neoconservatives are still fighting those fights. And I have a great quote here from Taylor Caldwell, where she's an author, a conservative author from the 60s. I accuse our politicians, and especially our local school boards, of breaking down the morals of our children. It's the school's fault. It's no one else. It's the schools. The schools are who radicalized those hippies, radicalized those people, told them that they had rights, and that's the reason we have moral decay in America. And believe it or not, That view is still present with us today. The new conservative backlash against education reform isn't new. It started actually in the 1970s with the moral majority. And they speak out against the excesses of the many liberal education methods and called for a back to the basics educational reform. Phonics. I know you've all heard of phonics. Phonics was seen as the way to save American education. Kids were not learning how to read using the old-fashioned way of the McGuffey readers and those phonics texts. And we need to get back to it. At this time, private companies, and this is very important also because publishers started getting involved, creating such products as Hooked on Phonics, Hooked on Math, the phonics game, and selling to parents. This was actually unprecedented before. You actually hear it on the radio. Wow, what? I can teach my kid at home? And of course, the homeschooling movement too. The prevailing idea that our schools were broken and had reached its peak when in 2002, No Child Left Behind was adopted, ushering in a new era of standards and tests that made publishers such as Pearson, who created and marketed these tests, very, very rich. Pearson is the #1 publisher now. Most of our texts and tests come from Pearson, which is actually a company in the UK, our publisher in the UK. So where does Common Core fit in historically? And my other speakers may have a different, perspective. This is kind of my perspective. I would put it in the back to the basics camp because it's a standards base. It's not a curriculum, it's standards base. How is it different? Well, for one thing, it is very different from most of this back to the basics, which tend to be states-oriented. Don't tell me what to do. I need to do my own thing. Common Core is not like that. It's the first time that you see a national set of standards. So in that sense, it's different than the back to the basics. So it's kind of a bit of both, really. At present, Common Core focuses solely on language arts and math standards. And I don't know, maybe you can tell me, we were told that science standards are coming. Have you heard of the date? Soon. Next year. Okay, 2015. So they are on their way, and that's good. We need more of those. We were told that science standards will be forthcoming. In other words, there will be no separate standards for the arts that I know of, humanities, social studies, physical education, or vocational education. Now, some states are working on those. I have seen some websites. But as of now in California and a lot of the states, no. The standards are going to be language arts, math, and science, which again, very much back to the basics. Of course, science is interesting because that is that point of contention. Are we going to teach evolution? Are we going to also teach creation science? I guess the states have a right to vote on how they're going to interpret that. In California, it will probably just be the theory of evolution being taught. Common Core is backed predominantly by business interests. This is a fact. This is a fact. Bill Gates being the most obvious one. The major architect for the Common Core, David Coleman, holds the title of Treasurer for Students First, Michelle Rhee's organization, which seeks to privatize completely public education, and currently is the head of the College Board, which publishes the SAT. Oh, I skipped again. Okay, we're almost done with our history lesson. Yeah. No, not a bad thing. No, I'll go into that in just a second. Actually, that's a really good question. It's not a bad thing. I want to be clear. I'm just giving kind of my interpretation of what I see it as. But if you are being taught in Common Core and the SAT is in fact going to reflect that, that's not a bad thing. That means our kids are going to be taught what they're going to be tested on. Not a bad thing. Okay, the proponents for Common Core. They say our Common Core standards will make our students more competitive in the 21st century economy. The Common Core features a lesser number of standards that go deeper and thereby giving students a greater and more comprehensive understanding of the concepts taught. If you looked at the California standards for language arts before Common Core, oh my goodness, it went on for pages and pages and pages and pages and pages. Not so much with the Common Core. You have a set of standards, and Nikki's going to talk more about it, and I know that Kevin is also. And those are going to cycle throughout the grades over and over and over again. Common Core are national standards. That means that students all over the country will be taught the same concepts, which provides a national uniformity that has been lacking in the past. So you have a kid who's living in California, he moves to New Mexico. Guess what? Same set of standards. It's not different. And Common Core develops critical thinking skills, and it does. I actually have a video I didn't include on this with my student doing a Common Core lesson, and they have to explain their thinking. They can't just give an answer in math. They have to explain it. Now the critics, and there are many, and it's growing. Critics. Common Core was not developed by professional educators, but by 3 men with big business ties. Bill Gates' political influence pushed through the Common Core before it could be pilot tested, tweaked, and enhanced. And the first state to adopt it was New York, and New York is the leader right now in implementation of the Common Core. Common Core devalues literature in favor of nonfiction writings by authors, because its chief architect, David Coleman, has gone on record that he does not himself enjoy literature and sees little value in teaching it. And that's a fact. He actually has gone on record. I saw it myself, him talking about it. And finally, and this is something that could change over time, large school districts such as LAUSD and New York City Public Schools have implemented it, and in the rush to implement it, they have not had textbooks that were aligned with Common Core. So you get a website, essentially, where teachers are told they have to get their lessons from, and I'm telling you the truth when I tell you the websites are the same lessons if you're in Iowa or in California or in New York, and you go through these modules that are not really visually appealing. They're kind of dry, and that's one of the critiques of it. But with time, that should change. And what does Common Core mean for you and your children and their future? The SAT and the ACT will both be aligned to the Common Core. And that's a good thing. Many colleges and universities will expect students to have certain skill sets that the Common Core emphasizes. So if you opt out of Common Core, you're going to be in trouble if you're looking to go to a public university. And this is important. If you guys have like a smartphone, or you could take a picture of this website, if you have children, please look at this website, www.engageny.org. It has all the lessons that all 36 states are now using for Common Core. Or maybe it's down to 45 states. I think Indiana, was that I heard right? They've bowed out. It has all the modules in math all the way through 12th grade, so you can get a sense of what your child is going to be expected to do and know and practice. You maybe can get some practice materials. Thank you so much for bearing with me on my short history of American educational reform. And now